Welcome to the Marquis Masters Podcast. I'm Ryan Estes. Today's guest is Albert Chin, and this is a story about a bold pivot that changed millions of lives. Albert started as a mechanical engineer, felt a pull towards something more meaningful, and made the rare leap into medicine. What followed is extraordinary. We're talking hundreds of patents, multiple medical companies, and innovations that have become the standard of care for patients around the world. His work has touched millions, not through hype, but through quiet, elegant problem solving. In this conversation, you'll hear how Albert blended engineering, medicine, and creativity to build devices that transform patient care, why simplicity is often the most powerful form of innovation, and how one individual can scale their impact far beyond a single career path. This episode is for founders, engineers, physicians, inventors, and anyone wondering what's possible when you trust your curiosity and take the long view. If you want to discover more remarkable stories like this one, head on over to marquiswhoswho.com and explore a collection of lives that redefined what success can look like. Go poke around, it's time well spent. And if you enjoy this episode, leave us a review. One sentence is all it takes to help great stories travel a little further. And now my conversation with Albert Chin. Al, thank you so much for joining me, and welcome to the Marquis Masters Podcast.
Yeah, thanks. Great to be here, Ryan.
I am really excited to speak with you. You've had a remarkable journey starting as a mechanical engineer, pivoting into medicine, hundreds of patents, which we'll get into. But I had a question to kick things off. I was wondering if the secret to your success is the Palisade peaches.
Yeah, I still miss those peaches. It's great that you know about them. They are like world class, so sweet. I still think about it every year.
100%. I really got a kick when I saw that you grew up in Grand Junction, Colorado, because I'm a Colorado boy. I live down south by Roxborough now, but Grand Junction the Mesa is one of the most incredible places in the world. And for folks that don't know, there's absolute legendary peaches and orchards down there in Palisade, just south of Grand Junction. Talk a little bit about growing up in Grand Junction and what that was like.
Okay, so my family moved there when I was 5 years old. And the reason we ended up in Grand Junction, which is about 30 miles from the Utah border, was that my father was a civil engineer with the Bureau of Reclamation. And so he was working on water projects, ditches, dams, and so on with the government. So we ended up there, beautiful place, pretty isolated. And so I started out school there and, became really interested in music because when I went to school, the first grade, the nuns taught me how to play the piano.
Amazing.
And by the time I was in the fourth grade, I started as a church organist. And then I played the violin, and starting in the sixth grade, I played in the Mesa College, which is junior college in town. And so I was really attuned to the musical world. But growing up in a small city, I realized that it would be very difficult for me to make a career out of music. And luckily, I was good enough in math that my father said, why don't you go do electrical engineering because they make a lot of money? But I ended up, when I got to college, I really gravitated more towards mechanical engineering because my first roommate as a freshman in college said, hey, let's do mechanical because it's cool. You can work in cars. And so that's what I did. And I'm certainly glad I did it because I really enjoy making all my own devices now.
I'm fascinated with your experience in music too, particularly church organ, because there's some stars in the church, but there's no star that shines brighter than the church organist. And I'm absolutely drawn to those old big organs in churches. That must have been an incredible experience. Do you still have a chance to play?
I play the piano now all the time, and throughout the years, I've actually performed in weddings for a lot of my coworkers. For example, at Guidant Cardiac Surgery, our chief medical officer was an Italian cardiac surgeon. So I did his wedding, which was in Bracciano, an hour north of Rome. And that's where Tom Cruise got married. And they didn't have a working organ. Their chapel was large. It was like a cathedral. So I shipped a keyboard over, rented some speakers, and did the entire wedding.
Incredible. Do you do a pretty mean toccata and fugue?
Oh, yeah, I love all the classical
Yeah.
composers.
Incredible. Amazing. Okay, so your story is one of a lot of pivots, starting in Grand Junction, playing music, going into mechanical engineering. When did you start to feel the draw of medicine?
So it was after my master's degree. I said, well, I'm kind of tired of school. I think I'm going to go do some work. So I went to Los Angeles and worked in aerospace at Hughes Aircraft. And it was there I realized, I was in a room with 100 engineers and I was working on a small part of a large satellite device. Or also we were working on a laser weapon that was on shipboard and airplane board. And so I said, this doesn't really mesh with what I'd like to do in a career. And at that time, my sister's husband was doing his internship at Los Angeles County Hospital in internal medicine. And he taught out patient care. And all of a sudden it clicked. I said, I want to do that. It would make a lot more meaning to me to be a physician and be able to treat patients than to get a PhD in engineering. So I said, well, it was 3 weeks before I was due to be married. I made the decision, I'm going to go back to school because I had no prerequisites, biology and chemistry, to enter medical school. And so the thing was, that's when I started designing medical devices. It was to help me get into medical school. I had a lot of fun as an undergraduate in mechanical engineering. My fraternity brothers and I would drive down from Boston to Florida for spring break. And so, as a consequence, by the time I graduated, I had to take music classes to bring my GPA up to 3.0. I said, that's not going to get me in med school. However, I was pretty good in design. So I had taken third place in the MIT Innovation Contest for designing a man-powered snowmobile, a pedal-powered snowmobile, which I built my senior year. So I started calling up physicians and asking them, well, is there any problems that you would need me to help solve as an engineer? And we got directed. My wife and I were living in this apartment. This woman who just had a baby said, well, my husband works with a guy who does stuff like that. And his name is Dr. Tom Fogarty, who's the most famous surgeon inventor alive today. He's 91. But he developed the first balloon catheter in the world. And so I called him up and he became my mentor. And it was shortly after meeting him, this was 47 years ago, he told me they had just started doing balloon angioplasty. So if you have coronary artery disease, putting a catheter in there and opening up the occlusion or stenosis. And he said, the problem is you have to put a catheter into it. I have a model here I can show. So if this is a model of an artery that has stenosis or narrowing, and you have a balloon catheter, when you try to put it in, it gets stuck. And in order to put it situated into the narrowed area, you'd have to push, and that would scrape off some of the plaque, and that would go downstream and occlude the artery downstream. So I thought about it, and 4 days after meeting with Dr. Fogarty, I came up with this idea, which is a balloon that's sucked back into the lumen of the catheter so that you only have to bring it up to the area of narrowing, and when you pressurize it, the balloon unrolls through that area and opens it up. This was my first patent and patented device. So The device came on the market when I was a fourth year medical student at UC San Francisco.
Have you ever wondered how some people's stories live on, not just through their work, but through history itself? For nearly 130 years, Marquis Who's Who has been documenting the lives of leaders, innovators, and changemakers across every profession. From CEOs and scientists to artists and educators, Marquis has captured the stories behind success, the people who define our times. Being listed in Marquis Who's Who isn't just recognition, it's taking control of your personal brand and using it to create a meaningful and impactful legacy. It's a record of your life's work, preserved, published, and accessible to generations who will study, research, and be inspired by your contribution. If you've built something meaningful and you've made an impact in your field or community, this is how you ensure your story is told and your personal brand is maintained accurately with integrity. Visit MarquisWho'sWho.com to learn more about how you or someone you admire can be featured, because history remembers those who take the time to record it. Incredible. Incredible. So you a master's of mechanical engineering, and I should say MIT and Stanford, correct? Yeah. And then going back to school to study prereqs for your medical degree. Did I hear you correctly that it was actually the designing of the tools that kind of aided your ability to qualify for med school? It wasn't necessarily the grades?
Yes, you're exactly correct. So that even though I did well on the MCAT test and so on like that, my undergraduate grades were pretty suspicious.
But it's got to be like a dream, because someone who's credentialed with your kind of talent as a mechanical engineer to get into medicine, I mean, it's probably unheard of. How was the difference as you're starting to transition from mechanical engineering into medicine? What was the difference in the culture like between engineers and doctors?
Well, what's interesting is because Dr. Fogarty was my mentor and he was a cardiothoracic and peripheral vascular surgeon, of course, I gravitated towards surgery. And as a mechanical engineer, I was very hands-on. And so that kind of played directly into becoming a surgeon, because I learned how to use a lathe and the milling machine. And I still, to this day, make all my own prototypes, devices for everything I design. So, of course, it was natural that I'd want to do surgery and to be able to manipulate all the instruments in the patient.
Yeah. Incredible. Like, what was your specialty in as a surgeon?
So I was thinking about doing cardiothoracic surgery.
Yeah.
However, when I was training as a resident in general surgery at Dallas, I stopped out after my second year of residency to go back and work with Dr. Fogarty in California. So I worked with him and developed some other instrumentation. And then instead of completing my training in surgery, in cardiothoracic surgery, I started a company, Origin Med Systems, which eventually became Guidant and Boston Scientific Cardiac Surgery divisions.
Incredible. So, okay, this is catching me up now. And you have your first invention and the patent that you demoed, which is absolutely incredible. I would love to hear how first you convinced your wife that you're going back to school. How'd you pull that off? But then as kind of like you have this first patent, what was the product rollout, maybe the impact of that first product?
So that product actually did not stay on the market for more than a year. I think at that time, back again, 45 years ago, it was difficult for them to sterilize. And so that concept of an unrolling balloon was used later in other areas. For example, I used it to go down the length of the fallopian tube and to help diagnose ovarian cancer. So that's another area. But most of my designs have been more in the cardiac space. So when I was at Origin and Guidant Cardiac Surgery, I came up with a device which is endoscope. You see this endoscope here. The endoscope is used to do like laparoscopic or endoscopic or thoracoscopic procedures. And at that time, when you're doing coronary bypass, you would have to harvest the greater saphenous vein, which runs all the way down the length of the leg from the groin to the ankle, and use that as a bypass graft because nothing else will stay open in the small coronary arteries. And the coronary artery is about 4 millimeters in diameter. And I came up with this invention, which was basically I put a tip, this little conical tip, which is transparent and radiused on the end, so it has a rounded end. And I use this, and this would give me continuous visualization as I would dissect along the entire length of the vein, so that now instead of slicing the entire leg open, which has the complications of non-healing and getting infected 25 to 40% of the time, now we can use this device and you have a 1-inch incision at the knee to pull out the entire vein. So this device has been used in over 3 million patients since I designed it. And it's used in 90% of all cases, coronary bypass cases in the U.S. today.
Incredible. What does it feel like, to know that like and it sounds like the common thread between both of these inventions, if I can call them that, is it's more gentle for the patient. So the adoption is like almost immediate. What does it feel like making that kind of impact?
Well, you're entirely correct. Right now, all the innovation and so on is to try to decrease the pain and morbidity and mortality of procedures on the patient. And so when I lecture at a lot of the universities and so on in the area, and I always tell the students that there is nothing more gratifying than doing a design that becomes a standard of care for the patients. Now, as a surgeon, I could reach thousands of patients during my career. However, if I invent something that is used around the world, then I'm using it on millions of patients.
Incredible. Yeah, and talk a little bit for folks that don't understand necessarily the patent process. What is it like, and what do you have to submit to obtain a patent, and what exactly does it protect as far as intellectual property?
So the patent process, which I've gotten really good at by this time because I've submitted so many applications, you can in the U.S. you can patent not only the device but a method of using that device, which is unusual. More of the countries around the world do not allow method patents, but it's important that you can lay out the steps of use of a device. And so I usually will go ahead, make a prototype, get a proof of concept of a device, and then I'll make drawings. It's interesting, the engineers these days, or the engineering students, a lot of them will start and they'll make a drawing of a concept. And sometimes in companies, what they'll do is they'll turn it over to a machinist who then tries to make a prototype of it. And then after it works and so on, they proceed towards product design and manufacturing and so on. Well, what I do is I go ahead and I draw out the device in my head, make it without making a drawing, and then after it works, I'll do a drawing to submit as a patent application.
Your technical ability is very rare. Is it not, that somebody who has kind of like the visionary capability of, one, being able to recognize problems, and it's also a very interesting part of your skill set to go out and ask, first, like, what do you need? But then be able to see it in your head, create it with your hands, also having the technical ability to marry that to that kind of visionary process, and then also have the business acumen to be able to go through a patent service and then bring it to market. So what does kind of go to market look like for some of these patents early on, and maybe how has that changed as kind of you're working on patents and products now?
Well, Ryan, it actually starts at the very beginning. So you're right that problem definition is critical to the later success, say, of a product, as well as if there's a startup company associated with that product. And so I was very fortunate to um, uh, be immersed, I think, in this technique that's fostered in the Stanford Biodesign Engineering Program, where they go through and they have a fellowship program where they take in 4 or 5 people, put them in a group, and they'll go through. And the first step they do is trying to come up with, say, 100 different potential products which need to be solved. And they look at it, and the really critical ones make it more desirable as a potential design device. And after that, you go through and try to solve it. So looking at that process, first of all, you have to look at what are the critical clinical problems. Now, the other thing is that since I've been associated with so many different startup companies, one can take a look at the startup companies that get funded right now because they've gone through the culling process by the venture capitalists and so on. And then you take a look at the really large clinical problems, congestive heart failure, atrial fibrillation, diabetes, and so on. And you say, well, what are other startup companies doing? And if I can come up with a design that's better, that functions better than the ones that other startup companies are doing, I've got myself a new company. And so I use that lots of times as a process. So basically what comes down to, it has to be, a device has to function for its intended purpose. And after that, you go ahead and you execute on it.
A personal question, does it drive you crazy when there's products that could be better and they're not?
No, it's an opportunity.
Okay.
So what happens is that I think probably 24 hours a day subconsciously about design and a particular problem, so that it's always technique related. So having a medical and surgical background certainly helps with the design. Students and engineers I've worked with in companies ask me, well, do I have to go to medical school to do well in design? And I always tell them, no, not at all, because I can teach you a certain surgical technique. And then I've had technicians and engineers, for example, that could do a sternotomy, just crack the chest open, do open chest access. And so once they go through this certain surgical technique, then they can take into account all the anatomical and physiological features that would enter into the design.
I'd love to know kind of more about that and like kind of your approach to design, particularly because, with medical tools, we're talking about something that has to perform at a very high level every single time, literally life or death, but also with regards to the surgeon or the doctor, there's an artistry to medicine, So what is your approach to design broadly?
Yes. So that again, I was fortunate. I did my master's degree at Stanford, where in the mechanical engineering division, they really emphasized visual thinking. And so basically what it is if you can, in your mind, draw pictures or envision a certain process, then it's going to help you with the design. And I've kind of internalized that. And when it comes to surgery, of course, I will just take a look and I will start kind of in my mind imagining, okay, what would be the exact surgical technique I would use to gain access to, for example, a certain bodily organ, and then to create a space to manipulate the tissue. And so the anatomy around that is visual. And then from there, I imagine what kind of instrument would I need to gain access and to manipulate the tissue. And so that's the process I use to design new surgical instruments.
Yeah. Was there any nod to style? Like, were you guys looking at Dieter Rams and things like that for inspiration?
Um, Again, I think because it's so surgically technique related,
Yeah.
I'll do kind of like the bare bones.
Yeah.
Now, another thing I've learned over the years, and I was fortunate to learn that early on, was that I need to simplify the design. So again, what is the simplest technique to manipulate tissue?
Yeah.
And so all my devices, as you can see, that first device, the endoscopic vein harvest device, all was a polycarbonate cone that allows continuous visualization during the dissection of the soft tissue around a vein. And so, to me, if I can come up with a paper clip for surgery, that type of simple device, it makes it a lot easier for the surgeons or the physicians to learn how to use the device, and it helps with the spread of the technique around the world.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of leads us to what I'm really interested in, what you're really excited about now. I mean, your legacy is unbelievable. We're talking 40 years of device innovation, 230 plus patents, a massive success by any standard. What are you really excited about now? And what is kind of your career look like over the next 10 years?
Oh, right now I'm in 5 different startup companies, but I am most excited about I have a company called Percassist that's doing, we've got a heart, a non-invasive or almost a non-surgical approach to an artificial heart or a left ventricular assist device. So right now in the U.S., there's probably about 200,000 people in advanced heart failure, and there's really no good medical treatment for that. These patients, it's a progressive disease, and the only definitive treatment is for heart transplantation or an artificial heart. But there's less than 2,000 donor hearts available every year in the U.S. and less than 3,000 artificial hearts placed. And so what I've developed, there's other people that have put bags around the heart and inflated to try to compress. So it mimics CPR. However, that requires open heart surgery. And these patients are too sick to undergo general anesthesia and a really long procedure. So I came up with this device, which is just a balloon cannula that can be placed inside the pericardial sac anterior to the left ventricle and inflated in synchrony with the electrocardiogram of the patient. So basically, this balloon during systole inflates and compresses the heart like CPR. And so far, we've treated 7 patients with this.
Incredible. So as opposed to wrapping around it, which means you have to go in through the front, you can kind of come in the same way, like through the knee, and then get to the heart and have in sense the same compression effect.
So to get around both the front and back side of the heart, anterior and posteriorly, is going to require a large incision in the pericardial sac, the fibrous sac that surrounds the heart.
Yeah.
And then I realized that a whole generation of cardiologists, electrophysiologists, that work on mapping and ablation of arrhythmias in the heart are using what's called a subxiphoid needle stick. So it's underneath the sternum. So you're starting just underneath the sternum, actually over the abdominal cavity, and then you use a needle, go through the diaphragm, and enter the pericardial sac. And so if you can get needle entry into the pericardium and then dilate up that tract to allow this balloon catheter to get in, then it would be a procedure that's not done in the operating room, but in the cath lab.
Wow. Incredible. Amazing. Love to ask a little bit about the future. And I wrote a question down. I'm going to read it so I don't kind of stammer through it. But I'm very interested in your take, because largely the med tech field is evolving between robots, AI, miniaturization, biointegration, remote monitoring, value-based care. That's just a few. In your view, what's the next frontier as far as technology and medical care in the States?
Now, me personally, I'm going to stay in devices just because I have this mechanical engineering background and so on. It's interesting, in my first company, I had two partners. Jay Watkins was a business guy, and then Fred Mall was a general surgeon also who had started companies. And he went off and started Intuitive Surgical, the first surgical robot. And he asked me to join him at Intuitive, and I said, Fred, I can't do a robot. When I was doing aerospace, I didn't enjoy it. So I really want to do simple devices. So right now, of course, robotic surgery has really entrenched itself in a lot of new procedures. And the ability for a robot to be so precise with its manipulation has earned it a really substantial place in the surgical therapy. However, again, I gravitate towards the really simple devices. So I'll start off with a simple mechanical surgical instrument that can treat, and later on we can layer in and add robotic control to it.
Yeah.
And AI. So those are some of the things. I think, again, a lot of the solution, though, to disease states will come with more genetic manipulation. And so that one is an area, of course, I don't have expertise with the biologics. But of course, there's still going to be a need for mechanical devices forever to treat.
Yeah, 100%. Is there a process you have to simplify? That's a major takeaway I'm learning from you is, the simplest solution is often the best and easiest to adopt. When you're approaching a project, how do you know when it's simple enough?
Oh, I iterate prototyping.
Yeah.
So again, I'll make prototypes, and then I'll think about, okay, what's an adequate bench test model to test out to show that it works. And then after that, I can go into cadavers or into animal models and try it. So, but when it comes to the actual design process, it's, again, by this time I've internalized it. So I think day and night. And so I'll do the technique in my head with a device. And then over the course of the intervening days and weeks, I'll simplify that device in my head and then make it.
Amazing. Simplify it in your head. So are you literally visualizing using the tool and being like, it's a little too thin. We got to thicken it up over here.
Well, yes. So for example, this endoscopic vein harness device, I remember all of a sudden this transparent cone popping into my head when I was in the shower. And so I could just visualize it and see, oh, if I had this taper with a blunt end, I wonder if I could see it. And so I had to go make a prototype, and I would machine out a taper on the machine shop, but I could never get it clear enough. And then all of a sudden I realized I can do this. I can go to a chemistry store, get a glass pipette, break off the long snout, seal it with a flame, and that'd be my prototype. So that's how I actually think about things. So half the time I'll actually think about what would it take to make an adequate prototype to test this device.
Amazing. It's interesting you said that you were in the shower. There was a quote or a sentiment, I forgot what it was, that the best ideas come in water or in motion. So either if you're driving in your car, you're on a train, you're in the shower, if you're Einstein, you're rowing on a boat. Have you found that to be true for your ideas?
So what it is I had to start off with it. And when I was a master's student, I would sit down and make myself think about one particular problem. And I could only think about it for about 10 or 15 minutes at a time. But I forced myself to do that every single day, to incorporate that into my own training for a design process, so that by now it's like I think day and night about all the different problems. And it's almost like I don't have to actively force myself to think. It just occurs naturally. So I've internalized that process.
You built the muscle up. Amazing. As we're kind of wrapping up here, that means we're getting close to the lightning round. Are you ready for the lightning round?
Certainly.
Okay. If you could meet one person, living or dead, who would it be?
I thought about that. I said, Thomas Edison.
Thomas Edison, classic inventor.
Yes, because apparently he's got like 1,000 patents. And so I'd be really curious as to what is his process for inventing. And also, what's the personality of this guy who's continuously so mechanical, electrical, everything? He's so analytical. Is he a normal guy?
Yeah. I'm absolutely, completely captivated by that time too. Turn of the century, industrial revolution, largely because men's fashion might have been peak back then. You had the cool top hats and you had those jackets with all the brass buttons and the long tail. Amazing.
Yes.
Fantastic. If you could start your career over again, would you have made any other choices?
None whatsoever.
Yeah.
I've just enjoyed every single year of my career. And like I said, I do miss the ability to do surgery. I'll do sometimes the initial cases for some of my devices. However, it's so gratifying also to be a surgeon, to be able to cure a patient within a matter of a few hours.
Yeah.
So that I missed. But like I said, it is to me the most gratifying to come up with something that becomes standard of care in other people's hands.
Incredible. Throughout the course of your career as a whole, as well as your personal life, what would you say is the most important lesson that you've learned?
Oh, I think, again, the most important lesson is that as you're going through life, if you think that there's something that needs to be changed, you've got to go ahead and change it. So I go back to my own case as I was a staff engineer in aerospace and getting close to getting married. And all of a sudden I said, I don't think I can do this 20 years from now and to be, an aerospace engineer. Should I go back to school for 2 years and try to get into med school? And the thing is, if I would not have taken that step, I certainly would regret it now.
Amazing. Last question. How have you benefited from Marquis Who's offerings?
Of course, I've known about Marquis probably most of my entire life. I've just seen all the different excellent people and their careers and so on, and read about them and said, "Oh, wow, what a fantastic kind of life that these people have lived." And so I think I was so honored that Marquis was able to kind of take me in and kind of nurture kind of my life story and present it to the world. And to me, again, it's just kind of the greatest honor.
Well, I've certainly enjoyed having you on the Marquis Masters podcast. I think we all, being a human on earth, owe you a debt of gratitude for the work that you've done. Absolutely incredible. It's been so fun to learn about you and your companies and your products and your inventions. It's been amazing. Where can people connect with you online?
So again, see, I'm on LinkedIn, so that's probably the best place to connect with me.
Tremendous. Al, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you, Ryan.